everybody. I'm Connie Stewart with SimplySimpleStamping.com. Welcome to today's Tuesday Tip Masterclass series. Hey, during the month of January 2021, I have been sharing some different techniques with you. We've done dry embossing, heat embossing, white crafting. Today, we're going to talk about sponging. This is a question I get asked quite a bit. Some people find it challenging to sponge. I hope in today's video I have some tips and techniques that will help you maybe perfect your sponging technique. And of course, I hope that you learn some brand new ways to incorporate sponging into your stamped art. So let's head over to my stamping table and get started sponging. All right, let's talk about the different sponging options that you have out there. So I'm going to start with my most favorite, which is one of our Stampin' Sponges. Now, you get 3 of these in a package, but if you've seen me work, you know I cut these down. So I'm going to show you later how you can turn your package of 3 Stampin' Sponges into 18 Stampin' Sponges. So stick around for that. My next favorite has got to be sponge daubers. I love these. They've got a really nice little sponge on one end. You see they fit just like a thimble on my finger, so I can work. And it keeps my hands clean. I do love those. There's also sponge rollers. So this, or a brayer, I'm sorry, this is a sponge brayer. It's a roller too. You know what, it reminds me of those hair rollers I had when I was a kid, but it's a sponge brayer. And this is a great way to brayer and sponge on a lot of color all over a piece of cardstock. And then the newest member of the family are the blending brushes. Maybe it's not technically a sponge, but it's a very super fine, very soft bristle, and it's going to give you some of the same looks as sponging. So I wanted to share the blending brushes as well. All right, now let's go ahead and we're going to talk some techniques, how we're going to use our different sponge items that we've got. Here we go. So I told you that I cut my sponges down into wedges, and I think you can see here I've got a binder clip that I've clipped onto the top. It helps keep my fingers clean, and you can see MM stands for Magenta Madness, so I can see my color. I'm going to show you how to make that here in just a second, but first let's talk about how to cut that sponge. To do that, you're going to want some long-handled scissors, and you are simply just going to cut straight through, and then we're going to cut into pizza or pie, whichever is your favorite, and we'll just cut that down. What I like about doing this is it now gives me, like I said, 18 sponges, and now I can make my little binder clips and do some different colors. So let me show you how I did my binder clip. I have just a little mini binder clip, and you're going to pick a piece of cardstock that is the color you want your sponge to be. I'm going to use cinnamon cider. This is cut 3/4 by 1 inch, so truly some scrap. We're just simply going to add some adhesive. I'm going to use the Stampin' Seal because I want something with a lot of sticky. And we're just going to take that, and it's going to kind of tuck right down inside the binder clip, and you're just simply going to wrap it. And it'll wrap around the other side. We give that a good press. If you've got really tiny handwriting, you could write cinnamon cider. I don't, so I'm just, and I really messed that up. Let's try that again. Cinnamon cider. All right, now I can open up that binder clip. I can take one of my Stampin' Sponges and just push that in there. Now I am ready to go. And as I said, it allows me something to hold on to. Now, how I store these is in something like this. Now, I picked this up at a craft store. This holds cross stitch floss, DMC floss, it's also called. So that's my storage solution to all those sponges. Now, I also want to say, if you just don't think you're going to sponge a lot, you could break these down into colors and hues. You might have a light blue and a dark blue. You might have a lighter yellow and a darker yellow. You see where I'm going. So you could do that too, because it's just as simple as just kind of wiping it off before you go into the next color. So feel free to do that. All right, now I've shown you some ways that I prep. Now I think it's ready to get into some techniques. Here we go. So first we'll start with just a basic sponging technique. Guys, this is probably one of my top questions I get. People struggle with sponging. So I'm going to put a little, I'm going to use early espresso. My number one tip is you want to kind of get some of that ink off. Now this one's not too bad, but you want to kind of get some of that ink off because as we go to sponge, less is more. I always say you can add more, but you can't take it away. I personally like to hold the cardstock really firm. And you notice I'm just kind of going on the edges and scraping right on the edges. Can you see that dark color? Now I want to go ahead and show you what happens if we don't tap off. You might get this, and you might see more of the sponge marks that you don't want. This comes out a little bit lighter. So again, we get some of that off, and you notice we get a much softer, more precise, I will say, sponging. When I sponge, because I'm showing this now, I'm going to just say I like to get a little extra on the corners. I think it kind of gives a really nice highlight. You notice how it's sponging the edges. So you kind of get this nice edge here and then the softer color here. Now that was a crumb cake cardstock with early espresso. Let's change that up. And we're going to go crumb cake ink on crumb cake cardstock. So I'm going to take my sponge. Remember, we always sponge off. See? Yeah, that really kind of comes off of there. So now let's come on this side. Remember, soft touch, scraping the sides of your cardstock. Pay close attention to the corners. So you see, that's a nice softer look versus that early espresso. Now, there are different ways that people like to sponge. Some people like to hold their cardstock down and sponge this way, and they'll swirl on the edges. So let me show you what that will look like. So we get this, and it is a great look. You notice you don't have as much here on the sides, but you know what? That's just simply, we're going to come in and we can add that depth. Again, if we need a little more, just like that. So it's kind of all about the type of look that you want. But when you sponge on the edges this way, just know you're going to get a lot more coverage versus when you scrape just on the sides. This is just another sample of what happens when you sponge maybe an early espresso on a crumb cake. You notice you get that nice sepia tone. Now this one here, I did some heat embossing with my white craft pad, but yeah, you can see it's really great to use your sponges when you want a really nice vintage look. It's absolutely perfect for that. How about sponging on a dry embossed image? This is so pretty. So this cardstock is also crumb cake. So I'm going to ink up my sponge. Remember, dab some off. And I'm just going to rub this back and forth, kind of swirl. Notice, remember, I did tap off because I can always add more. Watch, if I want to add more, I'll do it right down here. You see, it's easy to come in and add more. But did you know you can accomplish that same thing with sponge daubers? So same thing, just like you saw me do with the sponges. We want to get some of that off. And I can come in and I can come and start swirling. You want to use a really light touch. Do you see how different? It is a very different look than the sponges. But you know what? It's still a sponge. It's still a technique. And see, it just kind of gives you a little bit more a deeper image because that sponge, this one is going a little bit further down into the grooves. And then of course the brayer. So let's take our brayer and I'm just going to rub it and roll it back and forth. And you notice I'm only going one direction. You don't want to do this because you're only going to get part of the sponge. So you want to make sure you're going round and round and round. We ink that up. Again, you can test it before you go onto your cardstock. And if we roll that on here, it's going to give a little bit different look as well, which of course I would go and just keep adding that ink all the way down. Now with blending brushes, just like I kind of told you before, where you could use your sponges and you could have a light and a dark. Well, that's kind of what I've done with my blending brushes is that I have you know, some brown tones and I have some for my light blues because they're a little pricey to get one for all 50 colors. But you can see, again, wiping off, this is just another way to kind of get that nice, rich color on there. Okay, that is one hot mess of a piece of cardstock, but I hope that you can see just some of the different ways that you can use those sponges on a dry embossed image. We'll talk about how to clean your sponges at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that because I want to come in and do some more techniques. Here's one of my favorites. I love to use my Whisper White craft pad on a dry embossed image. Now, if you've been following the master class on techniques, you saw this one. I'm going to ink up my sponge dauber with some white. Again, I like to tap off some. And I'm just simply going to sponge this white ink over a dry embossed image. And you see how it just kind of really pops right off of there. Of course, I've already done the whole thing. But what I wanted to kind of show you with this is you can come in and you can add more, you know, kind of a little bit, press a little bit harder. And it's going to add a little more of that ink and kind of make those images just really pop. Now, you can also use one of the Stampin' Sponges for this technique as well. And you can see that here. I took Blushing Bride on a sponge and I just sponged that color right there, just like you saw me do. I just gently swirled. You notice this time I'm using a Stampin' Sponge instead of the sponge dauber. It's whichever one makes you happy. But yeah, you can see when you sponge that Blushing Bride on there, again, it just makes that dry embossed image really pop right off the page. Are you familiar with the Bokeh technique? I love this one, and this one is all about sponging. So this one, I use 3 colors, and I use Petal Pink, Flirty Flamingo, and Blushing Bride. How about we change it up? I'm going to do one in purples. Here's my purple sponge dauber. Now, when I do this, I always want to start with my lightest color. So I'm going to ink up my sponge dauber here. We'll tap it off, and I'm simply going to swirl some circles onto my cardstock. Remember the classic, I've said it, and I know I keep saying it over and over, less is more. I can always add more, but I can't take it away. You can make these circles whatever size you want. I like to go with the 3 colors, so I try to keep them somewhat small so that I have room. I'm going to do 4, I think, of this Seaside Spray. Now I'm going to go in my next lightest color, which is Highland Heather, ink it up, tap it off, and I want these two to touch, you know, the 2 colors. We're going to do some blending here. So, and don't worry if your circles aren't perfect. Once we come in and work with this technique, I think you're going to see it just doesn't matter. And now my last color, which is my darkest purple, Gorgeous Grape. And I'm going to come in and I'm just going to kind of start filling in. I'm going to let that Gorgeous Grape kind of get lighter and lighter as I fill in. But yeah, so, all right, that's not terribly attractive, is it? Well, now we're going to do the magic. I have a stencil here. Now, I actually taught this technique in my video on white craft ink. Oh, in fact, I'll share the video link to that up there in the corner if you want to check that out. So I'm back in with my white sponge dauber. I'm going to ink that up pretty good. This one I am going to be a little generous with the ink. So I'm going to just start swirling and tapping. Oh, by the way, this template, and like I said, I do talk about it in the other video, but this template is just a piece of vellum cardstock that I cut with my circle dies. And I just have 3 different circle dies in there. Now I'm going to go a little heavy with this white ink because remember, this is the Bokeh technique. And for this look, we need to kind of hide, but we want some of that purple to shine through. Are you ready? Look at this. Ah, it's so beautiful. Now we can take one of the smaller circles and we're going to come, and you notice we're just going to overlap a little bit. Now we can just kind of keep adding some circles. Oh, let's go. And you want to kind of come off the cardstock as well. So how about we come about right here? All right, let me finish this up so you can see what it looks like when it's complete. All right, I have it done, and now because my sponge dauber is round, I'm just going to come in and add just some small, just dots. And you see that kind of helps fill in, and then I didn't have to bring the stencil in. There we go, and now I have got a fabulous little background all ready to create on a card, and look at that. whichever color. Ooh, they're just so pretty. I love it. I hope you guys like that technique. It's a beautiful one. It's a little messy because my fingers do touch the template. And so just be aware that you might get a little bit messy with this technique, but I think it's worth it. Decorative masks are also a fabulous way to get a really great background, but you do need a Stampin' Sponge to do it. How about some polka dots? Now you can just lay your stencil on here and hold it in place, but I want to go ahead and show you just another technique how I like to do my masks. I like to use my Stamparatus. Now I don't need the top plate, so I can remove that. I'm going to go ahead and leave my sponge there. I think that's kind of optional. But I'm going to take one of my pieces of grid paper. Of course, this could just be scrap paper too, guys. It's fine. You're going to lay this here, and then you're going to put your mask on top. And then I'm going to come in with the magnets that come with my Stamparatus, and I'm going to put those right there on the edges. So when I do this technique, I do like to cut my cardstock just a little bit bigger than what I'm actually going to need, and then I can cut it down. You'll see what I mean here in just a second. How about some Mango Melody polka dots? That sounds good. Now for this technique, you can use any of the sponges, and I'm going to show you what each one looks like when you mask. So let's start with our brayer, and you remember we just go in one direction. Sometimes I do turn my ink pad, again, just trying to kind of keep my ink equal in there. So let's go ahead and add that ink right here. We'll just go at a diagonal, see what we get. All right. So just going back and forth, and I should have been running my roller this way, not just back and forth. So kind of keep that going. All right, so there's the brayer. Now let's come in, we'll come in with the sponge dauber, and I'm just gonna tap, 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 kind of get my ink all over. You can come in, you can swirl. The only thing I worry about swirling with a sponge dauber is I don't want to tear up the sponge on that mask. So sometimes it's just a little better. Just use a really light touch and I think you'll be okay. So we've tapped on with the sponge dauber. Now let's do a Stampin' Sponge. Ink that up. I'm going to tap and swirl. I'm not as worried about this type of sponge on that mask. So I think that's going to give it a really nice look. And you can see it goes on very, very fast. And if you want more, well, we just press a little harder, add more color. Let's see what we have. I'll remove my magnets. And when we remove our mask, this is what we have. So you can see that's where my magnets were. That's why I said sometimes it's nice when you do masking to go ahead and cut your cardstock a little bit bigger. But you can see here's where we use the brayer. Here's where we used the sponge daubers. And here's where we use the sponges. They're all still very similar, but it's just nice to know whatever sponge you want to use, it's going to work. Now, I didn't use the blending brush, although I could have, and that would have worked just fine too. I don't want to forget this little beauty. It's brand new, and I do tend to forget about it. I think you're going to fall in love with these blending brushes. But there we go with some masking. I'm going to teach you another masking technique. This one's really fun. Now, I have gone ahead and stamped, just wanted to send some happy thoughts your way. And I'm going to come in with a Post-it note, 2 actually. And what I'm going to do, I want 1, and I'm just going to punch a 1.5-inch circle right from the center. My next Post-it note, I want to find the sticky end because I need that sticky. And I'm going to slide my punch. Let's slide it down in the middle first and bring it over. I want to get right to that edge, right to that edge. There we go. Because I need that sticky to work with my technique. We're going to do a sunset. So the first thing I want to do is I want to come in with my Post-it note that has the circle, just punched in it. You're going to decide where you want your sun to be. And the reason I used this instead of trying to bring in this is I would go right off the edge because we're going to sponge. So I'll tell you what, for this one, let's do the brayer. But I do want you to know any of the sponges are going to work with this. So I'm going to take that Mango Melody again. We're going to ink that up. And I'm just going to brayer right over that circle. I think now you can see why I wanted to have that right there in the center, because I would not want to go off the edge with this sprayer. Very nice. Now I'm going to come in uh, with my post-it note. I can't talk today. My post-it note with that sticky. And we're just going to lay it right directly over. That's why it's called a mask. We're going to mask that. Before I do, I need to change out my roller. So you can see, just kind of spread this apart, pop them right off. Remember how I said they're going to remind you of the rollers you put in your hair when you were a kid? Yep, because now I can change out the rollers, and I'm going to put in, this is the one I used for some balmy blue. Now what's nice with these rollers, you can rinse them out, so I can kind of keep using them over and over again. Let's bring in that balmy blue, and we're going to make a beautiful sky. So you've seen me do it, and we're going to come right over that mask. And the more you kind of go over it, you can kind of blend. You're sort of blending out any of those lines. I'm going to make something a little beachy. So how about some Sahara sand? And I'm just going to kind of blend these two, the blue and the Sahara sand together a little bit. I'm going to remove that mask. There's my sun, and there's my palm trees. And that's just a really great way to add some great looking color with your brayer. But remember, you can do that with your sponge daubers. You can do that with your Stampin' Sponges and your blending brushes. Any of them will work, but that masking technique is fabulous when you're working with sponges. This is the card I shared in my previous video. I did some heat embossing with the white, and on this card I used my blending brush. Now I've already done it with the Daffodil Delight, so I'm going to bring in that Mango Melody, which is just a little shade darker. I'm going to go around it, all right? So I'm going to ink up. You can see we just ink up the blending brush. See, it picks up a lot of ink, right? So we're just going to sponge and swirl. You notice that color getting a little bit richer, a little bit darker. And you also see that the heat emboss, the white image, starting to disappear. But don't worry, we're going to come in and we're going to save that. And if you want to learn this technique, again, this is in my heat embossing video, and I'll put the link right up there for you so you can learn a little bit more how to do this. Now that we have that, I'm going to buff this away. I just keep a little microfiber cloth, but just a paper towel would work too. And when I say buff, all it's going to do is buff away the ink that is on that heat embossed area. And you see, it now has a really great pop. And I actually love this one where I have the Daffodil Delight and then highlighted it with the Mango Melody. I think it's absolutely stunning, and it's such a nice soft look. I have one last technique to show you, and that is creating clouds. I took my circle dies. You could do this with your circle punches as well. I cut out 4 different sizes, and you see I've just adhered them together. And that is my stencil for my clouds. So let me bring in a balmy blue. I do want to let you know, again, any of the sponges will work, but you know what? We're going soft. So I think the blending brush is going to be the best one to use here. Again, we're going to tap off some excess, and I'm just going to lay my little stencil, and I'm just going to swirl very lightly. We get some really beautiful clouds. Now I can flip this over, and it's going to give me a little bit kind of the opposite look, but it makes it more random, which is exactly what clouds are, right? Can you see this fabulous little technique? You can see, look at that, beautiful clouds, all from circle dies and a blending brush. Now let me go ahead and flip this over because I want to go ahead and show you the different look you would get with sponge daubers. So I'm just going to go around the edges, and you can see this is just a little bit, it's a little bit harsher, right? So you still have the option. You could do it with your sponge daubers, not liking that nearly as much. And then with a Stampin' Sponge, I think that comes out much softer. That's a little harsher. That actually, not on purpose, but I think this really kind of shows you the difference. There are some differences in the type of sponges you use. Now, we're going to talk about cleanup. All right, so to clean up your sponges, your sponge daubers, all of that, guys, running water. That's all you need to do. So I'm just going to take this, run it under water, squeeze it until the water's clear. Same thing with this brush. No soap. I'm just going to run that underwater. Remember, our ink is water-based, so that all should come out. Now, I will tell you, on my sponge daubers and my sponges, I don't typically wash them because I use them over and over again. I really use them a lot, but you can rinse these underwater as well. I would recommend you take your binder clip off, and yeah, we can clean those up. I'm going to go do that because I want you to see how well they clean up. All right, I am back from my kitchen sink. You can see my blue, my balmy blue is a little stained, but I got to tell you, I really never washed them, so that may have just really been set in. But you see my others, look, the Mango Melody, pretty much gone. This one was the one I believe I did in the balmy blue. And yeah, it takes it all out. Now you're going to want these to dry. And on the brayer as well, it's still very damp. I just squoze out as much water, pressed it in between a towel just to get as much water out as I could. And now I am ready when these are dry, I'll be ready to go with my next stamping project. I hope that you learned some new techniques from today's sponging video. It is sometimes a challenge, and I want to encourage everyone to just take the time to take some scratch paper and practice those sponging techniques, because sponging is such a gorgeous way to add dimension to a card. I hope that today's video was helpful to you. And if you missed any other of the videos in the series, head over to simplysimplestamping.com. When you find today's blog post, you'll be able to find all the videos in the series. And hey, I've even made it easy for you. Look down in the YouTube description. There's a link that'll take you right to it. Or even one better, why not find the playlist on today's techniques? You'll find that there in my YouTube description as well. Doing everything I can to make it easy. Well, guys, thank you so much for being here. I hope that you've enjoyed the Masterclass Tuesday tip series. I look forward to stamping with you guys again soon. So make it a great day. Bye-bye.